So far I've made the claim that it's possible to throw a lot of light on the mental health conditions via the modality of fairy tales as opposed to the modality of rational inquiry. But I haven't actually gone any way to explaining how this could be so. And it is, of course, very easy to make ludicrous claims. So hopefully in this installment I can turn what sounds like a ludicrous claim into something that doesn't sound quite so ludicrous. I'm going to start off with looking not so much at fairy tales, but myths, and creation myths in particular. And before I start, just to make the point that a creation myth, in the true sense of the word myth, doesn't tell us how it is. It's not like a dogmatic literal assertion of how things are. That's not a myth. That's kind of like a big stick when someone comes up to you with a big stick and hits you in the head. That's what a dogmatic literal thing is. There's nothing myth-like about it at all. It doesn't have any it doesn't have any ability to resonate with us. It just has the ability to cow us into silence if used with enough force. So, for example, if we take the standard scientific, even though it isn't really scientific, it's more of what we call an example of scientism, which is how science is digested and turned into a kind of dogmatic thing, which is something we human beings do with everything, because we're happier with dogmas than we are with ambivalent truths. And as I think it's John Horgan said, true science is always ironic. We don't like irony. There's something about irony, isn't there, that it doesn't really provide us with that nice sense of security. So according to the scientism type story, we're told how it is, and the universe came into existence via this process or that process, and we're all made out of atoms and molecules, and we are what Stan Grof calls Newtonian objects. Newtonian objects being objects that are subject to Newton's laws, which are, I can only remember the first one, F equals ma, but basically the mechanical laws that we will have to obey, and there's no exception to the mechanical laws because you have to obey them. So that is told to us in such a fashion that we ought to feel it's as if we are expected to feel enlightened and grateful for being told the truth by these so smart experts. But really, what's happening there is that we're being subjected to another dogma. So a more older dogma, or a dogma that people still have, would be the creationist myth. Right, this is how it is, you guys. God created the world and he did this and he wants us to do this, and this is his plan for you. Any questions? And the point is there is no questions, because you can't question a dogmatic authority, a voice of authority. One thing we all know and collectively know throughout mankind's history is that when you question these dogmatic authority structures, you get smacked on the head with a big stick or a brick or something. The whole point is not to question them. The whole point of dogma is that it's not malleable. It's not an interaction. You don't get to negotiate about it or reinterpret it. So both what passes as the scientific explanation of everything, who we are, what the world is, what the universe is, doesn't matter whether it's the old-fashioned Christian sort, or the so-called scientific, which is really scientism sort. In both cases, we're being subjected to a literal so-called explanation that isn't really an explanation, because neither is true. And we know neither is true because no literal explanation is ever true. Literal explanations come out of the head. They're our way of oversimplifying things. They don't come out of reality. They can exist in reality, but they're not an expression of what reality is in its essence. So there's two qualities to these dogmatic assertions of how things are. So we hear the big voice on the megaphone saying, listen up, you guys, this is how it is. And we know two things about that type of message. One, it's absolutely definite, literal, concrete. Number two, it's a total lie, a sham from beginning to end, because there's no such thing as a concrete or literal truth. All concrete, literal utterances are lies. So we have a lie type explanation, which isn't an explanation, but it's a lie that imprisons us. So that's the single most important thing to know about literal explanations. They have the function of imprisoning us and trapping us in the view that they propound. History of the human race. We create literal explanations and get trapped in these literal explanations. It absolutely is. If you could just write the history of the human race, you don't have to go into Henry VIII and what have you, in the Battle of Hastings, and God knows what else, Benjamin Franklin or whatever. You just have to say that human beings, or certain spokesmen for human beings, usually are men, it's kind of a man type thing to do, create literal dogmatic truths that are enforced, and we get trapped in that so-called truth. So the reason I'm saying all that is just that when I'm bringing up the subject of creation myths, I don't mean as we learn of it in Genesis, i.e. first of all there was nothing, and then God decides, he scratches his head and decides he's going to create the universe, and he does. And that's it. That isn't a myth. It's not a myth. It lacks all nuance whatsoever. It's a kind of brutal. It's a brutalization of our sensibilities. And I don't think that is originally how any thing was meant to be understood. Nothing was meant to be understood literally, despite what fundamentalist Christians will tell you. But just to say that, as understood, the story in Genesis doesn't count as a creation myth, because it doesn't resonate like a myth. It's actually trying to tell us something. Where a true myth, it isn't aggressive. It creates a new point of view, maybe, or shows the possibility of a new point of view. Or not even a single point of view, but a new way of looking at things that isn't contained within the old way. But there is no sense in which it wants to replace some other viewpoint. It's just a movement in the direction of increased perspective, allowing us to look at things, and it's interesting. Possibly, if we're not interested, it's not interesting, but it has the potential of being interesting, and it's not aggressive. It's not trying to shove anything down our throats. Such an awful characteristic of us humans is that we love shoving our beliefs and theories down other people's throats, which we do mainly because we don't really believe them ourselves, because we know they're lies deep down, and we want to try and persuade ourselves that they're not lies by convincing other people that they're not lies. And that's kind of what it's all about, really. So the two myths that I was going to talk about, the first myth would be the myth of how Brahma created the universe. And this is being talked about a lot by Alan Watts. It's what he calls his the core of his metaphysics really is this idea. So God or Brahma loses himself in his creation, which kind of means he is his creation, he's in his creation, and it's not separate from him, and he's not ruling over it towards some supposedly great end. But actually it's a game, and it is a game, because he throws it all away. Brahma throws everything away, all control, doesn't know what's going to happen. He dissolves himself into his creation. And then, as the second stage of the game, he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know that he's Brahma. He thinks that he's this person and that person. He's entirely cut off or separated from his true nature. I'm just using the word his because Brahma is characterized as male. So this is the game of God, Leela, divine play. And it's a myth, because the myth itself is playful. It's not saying this is how it is, because we can't say that, because we don't know how it is, because how it is isn't a literal thing, but we can kind of hint at it in a kind of playful way, maybe by playing about with some kind of myth like this. But for the purposes of what I'm talking about, the key point here is the amnesia of God. That God really, really doesn't know. And if you have to haul someone along, some fellow, some person, someone you meet on the street, say, hey, this is kind of what Alan Watts has said. Hey, you're Brahma. They're going to deny it. And I can promise you one thing. The amnesia is total. It's not as if they're going to think, well, yeah, I know I am really, but I'm just kidding, you know. I'm just pretending I'm just, you know, Joe Normal. Some guy in the street or some woman in the street. I know I'm Brahma. Now, I guarantee you that this amnesia is super complete, because you can go on pulling this stunt on everyone you know, and you're not going to find a twinkle in their eyes saying, yeah, I know I am really, but we'll just keep up the show, because, you know, the dumb thing is just to pretend that I'm not Brahma or God. So that's our first creation myth, which is kind of a light-hearted one when you put it like that, even though there is huge suffering involved in being cut off from who we really are, or our true nature, which contains strength and wisdom and would enable us to get on better, really. It's like if you disable someone and take away a lot of their faculties and make them kind of dumb in a way, and also insecure, and then throw them out into the world, it is going to be a pretty horrific business. And that's what Brahma's done. He's disabled himself and given himself amnesia. And it's a lot of confusion and suffering. But it does all work out in the end, not in the sense of some pie in the sky, everything's going to be okay, because it always was okay, because it's only a game. So that's the first myth. The second myth is less well known, and it's the Gnostic myth of creation, which isn't at all. Gnosticism is a heretical branch of Christianity, but it's not at all the same as the Genesis story, because it is super nuanced. Even the nuances have nuances, and it's not in any way having the flavour of something that's been rammed on our throat to beat us into submission so it can be controlled by the church. Like whatever else you can say about the Gnostics, they weren't like that, and that's why the established church hated them so much, and they made no bones about hating them, because they used to burn them whenever they could. So we know they hated them. They very effectively hated them and repressed them at every opportunity, because it's not a game for them, because they're literal dogmatic truth type proponents. Nothing's a game for them. It's all deadly serious. So when they burn you, they mean it seriously. When they persecute you and repress you, they mean it seriously. They've got no sense of humour whatsoever because they don't get the playful aspect of anything, which makes them very frightening. So the Gnostic myth of creation is kind of a weird one from our current normal perspective. So the universe was made accidentally, but not even accidentally, by mistake. It was kind of like a bit of an abortion, something that went wrong. And one of the aeons, Sophia, was kind of playing around with her abilities, her gifts, in creating another being. Only usually the story is that this would be done with two people. And so for the aeons, when they created someone, they didn't do it through having sex. They did it by kind of just projecting between them through an act of creation. And then the person would, whoever they would create, would come totally into existence, fully fledged, so to speak. And that's like the goddess Athena springing from her father's forehead, fully armed with a spear in one hand and a shield in the other, and all her armour on. It's that kind of a creation. That's not how we normally think of making a child, obviously, but that's how Zeus did it. So that's what Sophia was doing, but she was doing it on her own. So the story goes, and what she produced was kind of like monstrous. It was kind of like, as soon as you see it, you think, oh my God, it's like an abomination. It's a kind of horrific thing. This is a very, very rough and ready version of the story. Extremely rough and ready. So what she did is she threw it over a wall and thought, that thing's not going to last. I mean, look at it, it's going to die soon. Threw it over a wall, hurried up to join up the rest of their mates and said, I'm not going to say anything about that because it's just wrong. I mean, I won't do that again. I imagine she said, I don't know if she said that. But actually, this the being that she had created was incredibly powerful and drew power into itself and became more and more powerful. And one of the names for this being was the demiurge. And so what he did, the demiurge, he kind of created his own universe, just like God would create a universe, because he was very powerful, blind at the same time. One of his names is Samael, which means the blind one. He is kind of not really getting the full picture, but very, very powerful. So he creates a false universe, just like the world of the Matrix and the film The Matrix is a false universe, just like the set in the Truman Show is a false reality. Exactly the same thing. He does the same thing, and then he gathers all the soul sparks of human beings and traps them in it and says, yeah, I'm the big guy, I'm God, I made the universe, now, do what I say. It has a kind of power trip about it. So basically, the Gnostic story is that we shouldn't be very, very grateful for this material world that has been created, but actually it's a prison. And the only sane thing we can do is to find out how to escape from it. And we shouldn't be dumbly obedient to the creator God, who is a demiurge, the false God. God is not really what he pretends to be. He pretends to be the be-all and the end-all. And because he's actually imprisoned us, we shouldn't be happy and praising him the whole time for creating the world, because this material world is a prison, just as the body, which is a material body, was seen by the Gnostics as a prison, not a great gift. So this is a kind of a much more nuanced and complex way of looking at things. But the key point in this myth, for the purposes of what I'm talking about, is that we are separated from reality, and we are separated from who we really are. In the myth, we don't know that we're divine soul sparks. We just think that we're whatever things, basically, that were created by the demiurge, and we have to be grateful for that. And so we're separated from reality, we're separated from our true nature, which is an exalted nature, a divine nature. And so that is equivalent to the amnesia of God, even though it's a very different story. And in both cases, what we can say from that is that being separated from reality and being separated from our true nature equals pain. And even in Orthodox Christianity, theologians over the years, over the centuries, have tried to say reasonably enough that maybe the state of hell isn't an actual place, but it's a state of separation from God. So when we're completely cut off from God, we're in hell. And that's kind of the idea, that our station is one which is marked by suffering, because we don't know who we are, because we don't know what's real. So we're fobbed off with nonsense the whole time, which we have to try and make the most of and try and get some kind of sense of meaning out of, as if this is what life's supposed to be. Only there is no sense of meaning in it, because it's a sterile fiction. It's just some piece of nonsense that we've been fed. And as soon as we say that, of course, we think of modern society. Well, I think of modern society, because modern society tells us what life is, tells us what we're supposed to be interested in and engage in, because that's supposed to be meaningful to us. But it's a piece of nonsense, and at the end of it, we're going to be left completely sidetracked, that having abandoned or turned away from what really would be fruitful for us and meaningful for us. And there's modern society for you, yet another manifestation of the demiurge, who's still at it, of course. He's still at it in different guises. Like Philip K. Dick famously said, the empire never ended. It just changed its form a bit, or maybe a lot. Okay, so thanks for watching.